Thank you for joining us. I'm Carrie, and I'm here with Robert, who does historical tours of Greater Holyoke. He offers both public and private tours of the local canal systems, reservoirs, cemeteries, as well as various parks and streets in Holyoke, Chicopee, and South Hadley, Mass. Thank you, Robert, for coming on. You can find more information on his tours at his website at holyokecanaltours.org, where you can find out information on his various tours, as well as check out some of his videos, and keep an eye out for his upcoming 2023 tour schedule. You can also set up private tours with him as your personal tour guide, which make for fun and educational activities for the family or for your group parties, for special occasions or events, and also just for a day out. You can email him directly at bobcat2414, capital B, at yahoo.com. Again, that's BOBCAT4214, capital B, at yahoo.com. So today's podcast is on the South Hadley Falls Cemetery. Now, how did the South Hadley Falls Cemetery start?
In 1838, the cemetery was started by the Lamb family on the Lamb land. I think that they, in the beginning, gave the deed to the South Hadley Cemetery Association. Now, this was a need for the Falls neighborhood of South Hadley to have their own cemetery, because more and more people were permanently moving down to the Falls section of this community, South Hadley. There was the big old South Hadley burial ground in the middle of South Hadley Center, and there wasn't one down here, and there's about 5 miles separation. The South Hadley Canal had grown to such a large usage that more and more people were coming down here, supplying the workers that were living down here working on the canal. And so the canal made people come here, more people were here, means more deaths were happening, and so a need for a great cemetery. And you get what you get, and you have this beautiful cemetery here now since 1838. It's in a lawn style. It looks like a very urban one because there's houses around it. But in the beginning, there were no homes here. This was out off into the side. And along the way, it has changed. It has got a little bit larger, and also other cemeteries have brought into it. And I'll be talking about that along the way, and especially about some of the specific stones. So,
what other cemeteries were moved into the South Hadley Falls Cemetery?
now, what a question. Why would a cemetery be moved into another one? Lots of reasons. Well, I'll tell you about each one. The Pine Tree Cemetery was a cemetery that was in South Hadley when it was made in the 1790s. In 1806, the boundary line between South Hadley and Chicopee was moved because Hampshire County was split in two to make Hamilton County. And Chicopee went to Hamilton County, and South Hadley went to Hampshire County. You had a county boundary coming through there, and they wanted to be straight with the other county boundaries and surrounding communities. So you had to move the boundary of South Hadley a little bit over, like about 300 yards over to the south. And what did that do? It moved the Pine Tree Cemetery that was in South Hadley into Chicopee. And that original Pine Tree Cemetery served the Baptist church that John Pendleton had made in the 1770s and 80s. He had only the home, and inside the home was the church, and then next to it was the cemetery. It was only a few Baptists that followed him, so it wasn't a very big neighborhood that started there. But by the end, maybe around the 1850s, there might have been 60 barrels in there already. And there they were, stuck in Chicopee, even though they were South Hadley people, and they wanted to make a road right through there. And so they moved maybe 20 of the barrels into the South Hadley Falls Cemetery. Later, by the 1870s, 1880s, they moved 40 more burials, and these are found in a section towards the southwest corner of the Hadley Falls Cemetery. So that's one move. Another move was the Cooley Chapin Cemetery that was High Street in South Hadley. It included only one big stone and three small stones, but it included maybe about 20 people that were moved. And that was very close to this South Hadley Library. Another movement was two stones were moved from the old South Hadley burial ground in the center of South Hadley. The first one was probably moved in the 1880s, and that was one of the Bardwell stones, because the Bardwell family had moved from the center of the falls, and they wanted all the stones grouped together. Then in 1904, when the old South Hadley burial ground was moved into the back of Evergreen Cemetery, one family decided they wanted to be in the Falls Cemetery, and that was the Bowden family, which leads on to the next question.
Why don't you tell us a little bit about the Bowden family?
Well, William Bowden was a lawyer, and he moved into South Hadley, got married, built a home the same year. That home is right across the street from the library that's in Gaylord Street, and it's still there, that home. The Bowden home became the home for the kids and the grandkids, and so the Bowden presence in the Falls is very large. So many of William Bowden's children are buried in the Falls Cemetery with him. I think 4 of his 7 children are buried there. And many of his grandchildren are buried there too. And so the Bowden plot is in the Falls Cemetery. But the big deal is that some of the Bowden family died before 1838 and were buried in the old South Hadley's burial ground in the center. Some died after that. This is a family that had its home in the Falls, one of the first home in the Falls, but it was so early there that there was no cemetery yet in the Falls. So somewhere in the Bowden family is in the center, somewhere in the Falls. In 1904, Henry Bowden, one of the grandsons of William Bowden, decided that he wanted his family's stone moved out of the old South Hadley burial ground into the Falls. It was the only one that was done in 1904 into a different cemetery beside in back of Evergreen. And so this was a big move. He would die later that same year and be buried in the Falls. So no one knew this until I discovered this last year by looking at the list of the old South Hadley burial ground and the Falls burial ground and find out which ones might have been moved. And I found this was the one and only move in 1904.
Now, what are your goals with the South Hadley Cemetery?
My goal is hopefully there could be a group that will help maintain it very well. It's okay maintenance at this point, and I'll point out in the next question how it's being helped right now. I also want to have proof that the Bardwell stone is similar to the Bowden stone. The Bowden stone was moved in 1904. I want to prove that the Bardwell stone, the old one of the 3, was moved from the old South Hadley burial ground, probably in the 1870s or 80s, into the South Hadley Falls Cemetery. That's going to be a hard proof. The first proof of Bowden I could do off of a couple of lists, and it was great I could prove that. The Bardwell will be a tougher proof. I hear there are lists of stones that were moved into the body of Evergreen, and I want to find out if there was an original list for the old South Hadley burial ground. If there is, someday my research could lead to this proof.
What preservation measures are being taken on the cemetery?
I have to thank John Camp, who is the head of the Hadley Falls Cemetery. He comes almost every day in warm weather, spring, summer, and fall, to improve the grounds, to also make a list of all the burials there with their dates and the location of the stones. He helps maintain the stones by helping to keep them on an even keel. If they're not, he lifts them up and puts bricks underneath to keep them level. He also does a lot of the maintenance on the stones themselves. So he's great, but there deserves to be have a group there that comes in maybe 5 times, 5 days during the year, and washes the stones to make them turn back to their original color. There's a special solution that could clean these stones. And every cemetery is going to have problems with mold, mildew, fungus that grows on these. You could clean a stone and come back 5 years later, and it'll be all black again. So I hope someday South Hadley gets a preservation group that can do a little bit to clean up this cemetery. Thank you for coming on this cemetery. Again, it has a full tour on the internet. And I'm going to do one more cemetery in South Hadley, the Hadley Center walking tour. I'm going to go from Evergreen in the old burial ground to John Preston's grave, to Mary Lyon's grave. I'm going to finish finally what I started 7 years ago this year. Thank you.
Thank you, Robert. Again, he does the historical tours of Greater Holyoke, and you can find more information as well as his videos at holyokecanaltour.org, or email him directly to set up any private tours at bobcat4214, capital B, at yahoo.com. And look out for any of his upcoming podcasts. Thank you for tuning into our podcast, Canal Days, What Life Was Like in the Industrial Connecticut River Valley of Massachusetts. I'm your host, Carrie, and joining us today is Holyoke's very own local historian and creator of the historical tours of Greater Holyoke, Robert Como. He personally offers and leads public and private tours throughout the state of Massachusetts. The communities he has chosen to focus on this year are Holyoke, Chicopee, South Hadley, and East Hampton, and also Granby and Amherst as well. His tours spotlight the local canals, reservoirs, cemeteries, and churches, as well as various parks, streets, and selected historical houses within each community. In today's episode, we'll be discussing the Pine Grove Cemetery, located in Chicopee and South Hadley, Massachusetts. So, where was the Pine Grove Cemetery located?
It was located very close to the Chicopee South Hadley border. It's now a moved cemetery, and I know a lot about it because I've found both moved locations, and I've also found newspaper articles about it. And we're going to talk about why the cemetery was even started, and about its two moves, and also we're going to talk about what this area has been used for through the many, many years it's been around. Remember that this cemetery is a 1700 cemetery. Alright, so the Pine Grove Cemetery basically is where James Street in Chicopee was. At one time, South Hadley was further to the south than it is now, and it contained this cemetery within its border just barely. But in 1809, when the county lines were moved a bit, Hampshire and Handy County separated, and they moved the county line just a bit in South Hadley and Chicopee area. And the cemetery then became in what would have come later Chicopee, but was at that time a part of northern parts of Springfield. All right. It was a Baptist cemetery, and we'll talk about that, and we'll talk about when it was started up, and who was the first burial, and much more about it.
And why was the cemetery started?
It was started because John Pendleton, the pastor of the Baptist parish out in that location, he died when his horse kicked him in the head. And this was in 1788. The Baptists always liked to be far away from the Congregationalists so they could celebrate the Mass in their religion in the way they chose to celebrate it. Now, this cemetery was started and it continued, and there was about 48 burials within it, including many of the Pendleton family, his wife and some of his children. It was South Hadley Cemetery, like I said, from 1788 to 1809. Then from 1809 till when they started moving it, it was in Chicopee. And it was moved to two different locations, and we'll talk about that next.
And really quick, before we continue with the rest of our interview, just to fill our listeners in, if you want to find out more information or sign up for any of his various tours, you can check out his website at holyokecanaltour.org. And there you can find videos and podcasts of the stops along each of his tours, as well as photos and text of the historical sites throughout as well. And for private tours and other inquiries, you can email him directly at bobcat4214, and his tours make for fun, educational, outdoor activities for families and group parties. So tell us about the two movements of burials from the Pine Grove Cemetery.
All right, twice burials were moved on purpose to other cemeteries. The first move happened approximately in the 1850s when any Pine Grove burial that had a memorial stone next to it, the memorial stone plus the burial was moved to South Hadley Falls Cemetery. And there in that cemetery, you see a long line of the Pendleton family, and behind them are some older ones of the Lamb family. And that was the move. Probably about 25 burials were moved at that point. All right, now, that was only the first of the moves, because in 1888, the rest of the burials had to be moved, and they were going to be moved to the Chicopee Street Burial Ground, and 23 bodies had to be moved. Now, there was no monuments left. They knew they left some behind, the ones that did not have a stone, and a person who was a sexton of the cemetery knew where the ground was sinking in, and those were the locations where there were probably the other burials. Because when coffins collapse, they sink the ground inwards. And he was able to determine where the other 23 bodies were. So 48 bodies ended up being moved. And no stones were moved behind the mausoleum that's in the left center location of the Chicopee Street Burial. And they put in Chicopee this time because, remember, they were Chicopee's responsibility. The street that was going in at this location was a Chicopee Street, and so they had to be in charge of that entire move. And move they were. It's not known who the second movement was because there's no stones, no names. But the first movement, the stones exist in the South Hadley Falls Cemetery, so you can go see them.
And what has this area been used for through the years?
This area first was the Baptist Church, and it started in Springfield in the 1770s, 1780s, 1790s, and it became the Baptist area for a long time, including after the death of John Pendleton and his wife and some of his children and some of the neighbors around him that were the members of the Baptist Church also get buried in this location. All right, it was right around the James Street area, and it was right around the area where a street that used to exist right along the river was, and that street is now gone. That street was moved, and some of the homes were moved much later, but another way of thinking about the situation with the South Hadley wastewater treatment plant is go about 100 yards north of that, and you're right at the James Street, and the cemetery is right short of that street. Okay, so this was incredible. The second move within South Hadley ever. It actually was the first, and the second came later. But there's two moved cemeteries in South Hadley, plus a couple other small movements. And it is still easy to visit the stones because they're in the South Hadley Falls Cemetery. To find them, what you have to do is go in through the cemetery street entrance, go to the right road, and then before you start to turn onto the upper part of that road, look into the area on the far right. And about 2 rows or 3 rows in, you'll find the Pendleton family. They are the oldest stones in this cemetery, one of the only sexual and brown stones, and you should be able to find it very easily. Now this area after that, after the stones were removed, was an area where the gypsies used to like to meet, and they'd have a fairground there a few times a year. And I believe the circus even met a few times there. And then after that, of course, the street went in. And since then, I told you, the South Hadley wastewater treatment plant is very close to that area. Thank you.
And thank you, Robert, for educating us on your tours and historical topics of expertise. And of course, we want to thank our listeners for tuning in. And you can check out a large selection of our other podcasts. Thank you for tuning into our podcast, Canal Days, What Life Was Like in the Industrial Connecticut River Valley of Massachusetts. I'm your host, Carrie, and joining us today is Holyoke's very own local historian and creator of the historical tours of Greater Holyoke, Robert Cooley. He personally offers and leads public and private tours, as well as presentations of historical sites within communities throughout the state of Massachusetts. The communities he's chosen to focus on this year are Holyoke, Chicopee, South Hadley, and East Hampton, and also Granby and Amherst as well. His tours spotlight on the local canals, reservoirs, cemeteries, and churches, as well as various parks, streets, and selected historical houses within each community. In today's episode, we'll be discussing the Cooley Chapin Cemetery, located in South Hadley, Massachusetts. So, where was the Cooley Chapin Cemetery?
The Cooley Chapin Cemetery was on High Street of South Hadley, probably from the early 1800s. It was probably removed about 1910. And so today we're going to talk about is why and when it was moved, and then also about who were some of these people, individual people within the Cooley Chapin family, and where can you find that gravestone nowadays? It is one gravestone, a very big obelisk. And so the Cooley Chapin Cemetery was on the bend of High Street. High Street goes very straight for about 2/3 of a mile, and then in the other direction it goes straight only for about 130 feet or so. And at that bend, on the outer form of the bend, there was the Cooley Chapin Cemetery. One stone, many burials. And they wanted it moved. So if you want to visit that site, easy to find. It's now someone's lawn. And that gives away maybe why they wanted it moved itself.
And why and when was the Cooley Chapin Cemetery moved?
It was moved because a contractor wanted to build many more houses on land that he had purchased. And so this big Cooley land had a cemetery on it, and he didn't want it there because he was subdividing it up, and he wanted to have a place for the lawns and the homes of many, many more homesteads. And so he got permission to move it. They had to contact the family members, and yes, they were able to move it into the Hadley Falls Cemetery. It was probably moved 1910, but that's hard to nail down. So someday when I really get a firm date and then a story about it, then I can add it to the page for this wonderful cemetery.
And really quick, before we continue with the rest of our interview, just to fill our listeners in, if you want to sign up for any of his tours or find out more information, you can visit his website at holyokecanaltour.org. And there you can find videos and podcasts of the stops along each of his tours, as well as photos and text of these historical sites throughout as well. And for private tours or other inquiries, you can email him directly at bobcat4214, capital B, at yahoo.com. And his tours make for fun educational activities for families and group parties. So getting back to our interview, who are some of the burials of this family?
Within this family were some very important people, especially a person named Ariel Cooley. Ariel Cooley was the person that was the second owner of the Side Navigational Canal. He was the person that ended up getting removed the inclined plane that would raise the boats upwards to a higher level so they could navigate upwards. And what he did, he put a 5-lock system through that inclined plane area. And so Eric Cooley owned it for a long time till his death. And also, of course, his wife is here, and his wife is Lydia Cooley. And then several of his children are in this place here. All right. And they call it the Cooley Chapin because it also was such that the Cooley family married into the Chapin family. And so thus, in this area, you have a lot of people. I'll give you a rundown of some of their children. All right, but not all of them are buried here, so I won't name them all. Some I'll give you a hint. Calvin Cooley, not buried here. Judah Cooley, yes, he's buried here. Lydia Cooley, of course, the mother. Eric Cooley, the son, one of the sons, died very early, at not even 1 year old. Bathsheba Cooley is buried in Evergreen Cemetery. Titus Cooley, buried in Chicopee. Chester Cooley, buried in Chicopee. All right. Ariel Cooley had a grandson, a granddaughter that married into the Chapin family, and that's why they called it the Cooley Chapin Cemetery. Now, some people say that the stone was moved in 1902. Other people say it was moved in 1910. Who knows? And they're still searching, they're hunting that down.
And where can you find the gravestone?
So if you go into the South Hadley Falls Cemetery, also known as the Village Cemetery, there's an entrance road from Spring Street, and there's an entrance road off of Main Street onto Cemetery Road. You take that gravel road in, then go off to the left path as it tends in that direction, and you go upwards almost to the end, maybe about 200 feet inwards. And there's going to be a green space up there with a big obelisk, and about a dozen burials belong to the obelisk. It has the names of all those 12 people written on it with years, and that is the Cooley Chapin obelisk or gravestone. And that's the one you should look at. Imagine moving all these people here into this cemetery. You can tell right away that it was moved about 1900, 1910, because the stones that surround it are from about that era too. So you know it's a moved stone. It's not the only moved stone within the cemetery. The Bowden family also had about a dozen members moved into the cemetery from the old Hadley Center Cemetery. And also the Pendleton family and other families they married into who were buried in the Pine Grove Cemetery on the South Hadley Chicopee border were moved into here too. And they were all very obvious that they were moved. And one more family was the Gaylord family, also moved here from the Hadley Center Cemetery. So you can find very easily the Cooley Chapin stone and all these other stones that I mentioned. And so they have a lot of companions there with being moved.
And thank you, Robert, for educating us on your tours and historical topics of your expertise. And we want to thank our listeners for tuning in. And you can check out a large selection of our other podcasts on his website